Hey, this is Dave.
Hey, this is Jason.
And this is Ska.
Hey, Dave, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing, Jason?
Oh, I'm good, man. This is gonna be your first podcast. What are we gonna talk about?
We're going to talk about the Ska.
Ska. You know what? That's a good thing that we named our podcast "This Is Ska." Then
That is
and that's
true.
what we're gonna talk about.
That is true.
I think that
That's
makes
convenient,
sense.
yeah.
Convenient. I like how that worked out. Dave, introduce yourself. Where are you from?
I am the Denver Dave. I am from Denver.
That's how I met him.
I now live in Los Angeles, California. I've lived out here for 10 years. This all kind of stems from a campus television show that I had in the mid-90s back in Denver, Colorado.
Way before I knew you.
I loved the ska back in the day. I'd go to a new wave club, and once an hour they would play a punk song, and everybody started pitting. It was great, and girls ran for their lives. And then one day they played something that was like punk, but it was so infinitely better that I just couldn't believe it. And it was One Step Beyond by Madness. And I was like, what the hell is that?
That just blew you away?
Yeah, it's like reggae, because everybody heard reggae, but at that point, it's hard, I think, for people today to understand that knowledge was sequestered. So if you wanted to know about ska, you couldn't just say, oh, well, what is ska? Because there were only like 3 people in the country that knew anything about it.
Right.
And none of them lived in Denver. So
that's how it was, right? Like
that was just the way it was.
You know, you had these little pockets, but they really weren't connected at that point yet.
Not at all.
It was very Midwest, New York, and West Coast, and then you had little pockets here and there. But for the most part,
well, and truthfully, Denver had a good ska scene.
Yeah.
It just wasn't very cohesive. Like, you know, all the guys I saw at ska shows, it wasn't like we were meeting up after or at a different time. Like, I'd see them at ska shows. I knew all those guys. If somebody wanted to punch one of them in the face, there would be hell to pay from a group of guys, but it wasn't like you knew what their names were, you know? It was just like, it just wasn't as cohesive as all that. I had people tell me that the Special started ska, just schooling me up. Like,
right. But you didn't know it. You didn't know.
Well, and at the point somebody did that,
yeah.
like, I knew the guy was full of it. But the bold-faced say that, that guy was spouting the knowledge that he had.
Right up until that point, you kind of had there was no internet. There was no easy way to get this information. If you heard this music, you really had to do your homework, send out cards and letters to people overseas, or find it in some local store that was importing music at that time, that some guy just kind of was in that UK stuff and that music and what was happening. You really had to dive and research and talk to people, and you couldn't just pick up a phone or get on your internet and figure it out.
Yeah, it wasn't as straightforward as it is today.
Yeah.
I hit a sweet spot when I moved out here. LA was blowing up as far as ska.
Very true.
In 2005, it was really a pretty incredible time to be here. I got to see Ocean's 11, the Desmond Decker, Dr. Ringding. Like,
that's true, right? Yeah.
I never thought I would get to see Dr. Ringding. I mean, where are you going to see him? Like,
what? And how did you see all those bands? Why was it such a good time to see all those bands at that time?
The Blue Beat Lounge.
Blue Beat Lounge.
Down. The Blue Beat Lounge. One of the reasons I moved out here was because Chris Murray had a weekly ska show on Tuesday nights down in the heart of Hollywood, which is just shocking that you could have got that location. But
now, for those of you that are listening who don't know who Chris Murray is, which I find hard to believe, find very hard to believe, because the man has been playing for over 20 years, from
King Apparatus
in Canada to the Specials to the Scatlights. He used to tour with the Scatlights. He's toured all over the world. He's the one-man ska band, and he's great. It was a magical time because before that, in the 90s, you had Steady Beat. At least here in LA, you had Steady Beats records. They were the sort of the West Coast sound, and they kind of stopped doing stuff. And 2001, 2002, Chris was here in LA. He was between gigs. He wanted to put some roots down, and he started a weekly music showcase.
Artist residency
at one of the best clubs that we've ever had in LA. It was a Knitting Factory. The Knitting Factory was 3 floors, 3 rooms, really great environment. The people that were there were really supportive. it was a magical time, and it was all ages too, and that was really big. He really specifically wanted it to be all ages because there were no all ages ska clubs specifically in LA, and he really wanted to foster this new scene. So you had this club that was all ages, very cheap to get in. It was $5, and it always had 3 bands playing on a Tuesday night. You knew that you could go there and see some ska. It was going to be a traditional band. It was going to be an acoustic. It was going to be a third wave band, but it didn't matter because it was just about all of us supporting Chris, the music, and ska, and it was really, really magical. And that's
creating a scene.
Yeah.
Like, where in Denver, I recognized a bunch of guys that like ska. I never got into the scene, where out here, the second person that I met in Los Angeles was you.
Yeah, right.
And so
it's your fault we're still friends, by the way. You had your chance to get out, so you can never blame me. You had more than enough chances.
I can blame you.
I'm Jason. Obviously I've been involved in ska for many years, different record labels and promoting and tour managing, everything except playing in a band for the most part. I'm going to be sort of giving the West Coast perspective. Dave's going to give the Midwest perspective on ska.
And truthfully, like, to call Denver the Midwest is not truthfully accurate.
Yeah.
The Midwest is more, if you're talking about ska, it'd be Michigan and...
Yeah. Those. But for this podcast...
I will
our
be...
usage,
the place in between the East Coast and the West Coast would be Denver, because that's really,
kind of.
There's really only one thing
that is
in between.
Chicago.
Yeah.
So, and we hope to bring in, the idea behind this podcast is really just talk about some of the greatest albums that have come out, ska albums specifically, why they were such an impact, why they did reverberate.
Why they were important to you and me.
Yeah. Like, how did Dave receive this album? How did the West Coast, me, receive this album? And we'll bring in other people from the East Coast at some point.
Well, we'll see if they want to show up.
Yeah, exactly. We can entice them to come on. But just get that different perspective of, you take it, each podcast will almost be, here's an album, whether it's a Boss Stones album, or a Pie Tasters album, or a Let's Go Bowling album, or Hepcat, or any one that we feel was a very important album to one of us, and sort of discuss why it was an important album, how it affected each of us. Maybe I didn't hear about it when it came out. Well, why didn't I hear about it? And what happens when I eventually heard that album, and what did I think about it? So it's just, basically, we're going to talk about ska, talk about some of our favorite bands, talk about some of our favorite albums, and why they made an impact for us, for that scene. So, I think that's kind of lays out what our goals are, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully that sums up for everyone listening what they can expect going forward. Dave has picked out some great albums already. He's got like a list of top 10 albums that he wants to discuss. I got
more like top
20.
Yeah.
You sent me,
I started with a list of 10, and I was like, well, we got to put
Wait, what about this one? But that's the fun. That's the thing. There's so many amazing albums, so many amazing bands for the American ska scene. And we won't stick to just American ska. Yeah. There's plenty of albums from the Trojans to Tokyo Ska Paradise, to even a Chris Murray, King Apparatus album.
Like the Valkyries.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I love that band, So we'll get to all of those.
First wave, two-tone, third wave, modern stuff. A lot of ground to be covered. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, just like I said, the idea behind this podcast is to highlight some of the greatest albums that have come out, and why are they great? And
you're wrong.
I'm wrong. That happens. It'll happen more than once. I
needed to correct you. I mean, you're right, but like, you give me an opportunity to say that you're wrong, I'm going to do that. So.
I wouldn't expect anything less.
Talking about the different ska albums that were important to us, how they affected us. We want to have the opportunity to expose new people to this music that was important to us.
True. In
researching this podcast, looking at people's top 10s, and I'm just like, I've been a ska fan for a while, and I saw lots of top 10 lists where I'm just like, man, I've never heard of any of these bands. Just because there are a lot of those lists that are so deep in the Orange County. It begins and ends in Orange County. And not to say that I don't like some of the OC ska stuff. In fact, I would say that I like it more than you do. So
that's very true. Yeah, that is one of the things that I think about this podcast can really do is highlight those differences. Everyone has a different top 10. Well, why are they, the top 10? Let's discuss that. And really highlighting albums that me on the West Coast maybe never heard of or, didn't really give a thorough listening to the first time around because it was New York or because it was Midwest. And I'm like, whatever, I'm from LA.
One of the nice things about being from Denver is that it was on the route going west. You go through Chicago and then your next real stop, you get to have a couple of podunk stops in between, but really your next stop is Denver and then Salt Lake and then San Fran, LA. So we got a lot of the East Coast bands that were coming out, but we also had West Coast bands that would stop by when they were heading east. And we had a really good promoter for Third Wave. There were a couple bands that were friends with a bunch of the Denver guys, and so they'd just come out. Let's Go Bowling was like a local band for us.
And rightly so, because they're one of the awesomest bands ever.
They are, and I think that we were a little spoiled because they would play about once a month, and it was great. The local promoter also was in really good with Bucket, and so...
From the Toasters.
From the Toasters. And so the Moonska guys would come, they would definitely stop in Denver. And the Pie Tasters were
from DC.
They were pals with a group of guys called the Pub Scouts, a scooter club. They would play about once a month. We just had a great ska scene.
And it's still that way. I mean, Denver literally is the middle point for most. It's just a great town. Every time I've gone there, I love it. I love the people. I love the vibe. And yeah, they typically have a really good, positive, for the most part, scene. And they're excited when you do get a band on there. I've toured with the Skylights through there a number of times. But even then, it's just people are excited to see bands. It's almost not like here, at least definitely not right now, where people are like jaded and whatever, it's a ska band, we don't care. You go to a city like that, you even go to Chicago, you go to sort of any of these smaller towns on those tours, and people get really excited about the bands that are coming through.
I feel really lucky, and then to come out here just at the best time ever, really.
Yeah, how was that for you? And I know you mentioned it as like, hey, it's just great, but can you talk about it? Can you describe what that feeling is coming from Denver? Because before you came out here, you did a lot of interviews, you met a lot of bands, you were in that scene heavily, and then you come out here and it's a completely different sort of environment.
One of the things that happened right off the bat was that I got to see the English Beat, which, the English Beat doesn't go to Denver. And so I'd never seen them before. We went out to that show, and I'd never heard of the Untouchables. It was just kind of like this hole in what I'd heard.
Yeah. And as is the Untouchables, it was Untouchables and Fishbone. So here's a pure example right here of a band that was internationally known and yet still not known in certain parts of the country.
Yeah. When
you talk about ska, early 80s music of the States, you have Fishbone, you have Untouchables. That was it. And the Toasters, obviously, those three artists.
Well, and the thing about it was, I was sitting there and listening to Untouchables for the first time. I'm like, man, this is great. And that lead singer looks really familiar. And I realized that I'd been riding scooters with him for the month that I'd been there.
Oh, yeah, right, because you moved out here.
I moved out here and riding scooters, and he was part of the West Side Scooter Club.
Yeah.
And I'd been riding with those guys a little bit, and so I've been riding scooters with a ska legend, not knowing it. So it's
that's pretty funny because you're like, yeah, he's just some guy, man. He's riding scooters.
A cool guy,
Yeah, and then you're like, wait a second, this guy's been in a international touring, signed, major label basically.
That we're hanging out, they got to watch the Body Snatchers get formed.
Right,
it's pretty amazing stuff. So
welcome to LA, Dave.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Well, and in 1 week when I was first in town, I went and met you at Bar 1, and the lead singer of Hepcat was tending bar. We turned around and saw Madness twice in that week. There's no way that you get to see Madness if you live in Denver.
Right.
Rico showed up. He was playing that week. And then we went to some random bar and saw Fishbone blow the place apart.
Oh, that's right. That was that, what bar was that? That
was the Scene.
The Scene bar, which is It's a dive bar. It's a horrible dive bar. One time, Fishbone played there. And we did. Me, Dave, a bunch of other us went out. The stage was just barely enough to fit them, and this is
Scooter's
Fishbone.
like side to side on the sidewalk.
So here you are good. Within a matter of a month or a couple months, you've met a band that you never knew about. You got to hang out with, a guy, the lead singer Greg from Hepcat, meet one of those idols.
And I interviewed Greg. I think I interviewed him in '96. And so it was still at the time where you could not get somebody to give you a straight answer on where ska came from. And he gave the most concise and consistent answer I've ever heard. It's like, I knew who he was. Like, I'd met him before. But, and then Persephone was sitting at the bar.
Persephone is from, one of the lead singers from Ocean 11, who was coming out. And obviously, Ocean 11 is one of the most original, amazing bands ever to come out of LA. Really played this style as close to the original as possible. And so, it's almost like a ska shock, culture shock. You're out here, and these are people just hang out and, typically go to shows, and Untouchables and Fishbone and Hepcat and Ocean 11 and, all of these bands that you may not have seen, but you knew of, you listened to.
And D'Angelo shows up to all kinds of shows. Yeah. Like, you see him, and he's just wandering around. I was at Specials, the girl that I went with, she's like, look at that guy's shoes, man. They are really sharp. I'm like, yeah, that's because he's the lead singer at Fishbone.
Yes, he's always got to look good, man. He's always been a fashion icon, really.
Denver has kind of a tenuous relationship with LA because so many people move there from LA. So, like, when I told people that I was moving to LA, they were just like, dude, you don't move there. I'd come back. I'm just like, you guys are fools, man. Like, you don't even know.
There's ska and scooters on every corner.
Man, like, I moved out here, and one of the guys I used to work with had moved out before me, and he just wasn't meeting people. He's, LA, it's hard to meet people. And so, like, 3 weeks into living out here, he's like, well, you want to hang out? I'm like, yeah, when do you want to go? Are you free tonight? I'm like, no, I got a ska show tonight. He's like, well, how about day after tomorrow? I'm like, oh, no, there's a scooter ride. And it just went on like that because in 2005, this place was freaking awesome. Like, there was a weekly scooter ride on Friday nights. There were about 3 other clubs where they'd have monthly rides. So if you couldn't make it to the Friday night ride, you could always pick something up. And then there were ska shows. Tuesday was always Blue Beat. And then there was generally that band played on the weekend someplace else. If you missed that one or you wanted to double up, you could go see that.
Yeah, I mean, at that time, you had, there was a lot of scootering going on. And for us, you and me, definitely, that's why we're friends. Ska and scooters, that's our world. I mean, everything, that's just who we are. So it really went hand in hand. And yeah, you had a weekly ride, and you had enough people that were riding where you could ride to a club and make an impression and have some good times. But that you had, like, Monday nights was Rocksteady Lounge, and then Tuesday was the Blue Beat Lounge, and Wednesday was the world famous Dub Club, and then Thursday was maybe something else.
Well, and then Zen Sushi, it was blowing up for a while when you were working there.
Yeah, we were doing a bunch of different clubs and a bunch of events, and we had a bunch of different things going on, and it was great. Yeah, I mean, you almost could go to a different ska and reggae show every night of the week. That's why they call it, Little Kingston here kind of thing. It's just like there's so much.
Who calls it Little Kingston?
Everybody. You've never heard that?
You're a liar.
No, I don't make that stuff up. I'm just trying to start that, actually.
Yes. Good luck with
it's
that.
like, you talk to some of the old hats, and we make that joke about it because at that time, there was, every night was a different sound system, or a DJ, or a band, or an event, or where you could just every night you could go out to something different. It was great.
I think that if I moved here today, I would probably turn around and go home. But
yeah, it's pretty.
It's like in a lot of ways I'm kind of in a different world doing different stuff. But
don't get married and have kids.
No, get married. If you want to get married because it's freaking awesome.
I joke, absolutely. I love you. I love the kids. I love the family. And so yeah, you thing is, do what makes you feel good, and if that's what makes you feel good, go and do it.
But the thing about it is to let people know just how good it was, and hopefully re-energize the scene in LA. Anything that we can do would be great.
Well, and I think, okay, so going back to your Denver days, you started interviewing bands. Okay, first of all, he's a TV editor. This is what he does. This is his career. So even back then, you were filming bands.
Yeah.
And you almost didn't know what you were doing.
What happened was I was working at the campus television station, and the head guy graduated, and I was the guy with the next amount of seniority, and so they made me the head of the station. I'm like, well, how can I abuse this power? I'm going to go interview every damn ska band that comes through this joint, and I did. I was a working man.
So you have endless hours of footage from this time period, which you've now been working on off and on for a while to turn it
more
into...
off.
I was being nice. I mean, well, basically turn that into a sort of half-hour show called This Is Ska.
Yeah. I saw Buster Blood Vessel, and I was just like, holy crap. And that guy is so nice. He may be the nicest human I've ever met.
Try touring with him. It's a little different.
Okay, well,
That's good. But...
the night that I saw him, his tour manager, because tour managers are a bunch of jerks.
I know. I hate those guys.
I could tell that he was putting me off. I was like, if I don't do something, I'm going to miss this opportunity, and I'm going to hate it. So I'm like, hey, colossal 800-pound monster guy, can I ask you some random questions about being a two-tone guy? And he was so nice. He's like, I'm not feeling very well and I'm really tired, but I'll sit here and talk to you as long as you want. And just the best answers, very concise. By that point, I'd interviewed enough bands that I was like, okay, I'm going to make this into a show. That sums it up. This is ska. Yeah. I want to tell people what ska is.
So we've been trying to distill that footage into a TV show, not a TV show, just like an online show.
Like 30... anything. I've cut that stuff 8 ways to Sunday. It's one of those things where I just, at that point in my life, didn't have enough experience asking questions, and so I asked kind of dumb questions.
Right.
But
that's okay. I mean, that's the time.
It's one of those things where it is what it is, and it was fun, and man, did I talk to a lot of ska bands.
You're trying to make this show called This Is Ska, and now sort of this podcast is sort of an outgrowth of that, because we're not able to sort of get the show format down to what works. You have all this footage. Anything that I'm
satisfied with.
Right, yeah. We don't have that. We want to continue that This Is Ska idea, and that's why we've started this podcast to sort of continue that outgrowth of those interviews, the talking, anything that we can do to get people discussing and talking about these great artists and these great albums.
Yeah.
We'll get to the show one day, Dave. I mean, we're not dead yet. We'll figure it out one of these days. When you got time. When the kids are old and in high school, you'll finally get around to it.
Yeah.
It'll be great. I can't wait.
Well, let's talk about you. Now, you've been into the ska for a long time now.
Yeah, not as long as some people, but started doing promotions, mid-90s, DJing, collecting records. My earliest musical memory was me humming Magnus is Our House. It came out in 85. I'm 7 years old. For some reason, I heard it somewhere. All I know is I have almost no memories before that time. And it wasn't until I was sort of in high school and I started listening again, finding music. I was working, some old Mexican guy actually. I was in my car. I was listening to like Voodoo Glow Skulls. Came up to with a specials tape of their first album. Handed it to me. Said, here, listen to this. And it just blew me away, and I was like, what the hell? Because up to that point, it was all of the third wave ska. It was Buck 09 and sort of Jelly Beans and Op Ivy, and, but I still didn't really know the specials yet. And started listening to that, started finding more stuff, and then found Magnus. And as soon as I heard the specials, realized that my earliest memory is me humming Magnus is Our House, I'm like, that's my life. That's it. That's who I am. I found out my music and Rude Boys and scootering and ska, and I've always kept on that trajectory, just researching and listening and finding more and anything I can do to hear more bands and that sound. So came up and did shows, started a record label, Lawless Street Records, around 2000, released one CD of acoustic ska actually, tribute sort of to Chris Murray, and a single from The Vessels, which basically sort of begat the Agrolites. Booked clubs, tour managed, Manage a bunch of bands, Latin bands, ska bands. Started at my second record label, Moondust Records, putting out stuff from one of my godfather, my idol, Laura Lakin. My first release was a reissue from him on 45. So everything, I've toured as a tour manager for the Scatolites. So everything has just been about the music. So that's kind of our stories. That's Dave.
That's Jason.
And this is Ska.
This is
Ska.